Have you ever seen a giant Spider-Man like this? Or a mermaid like this? They were ordinary humans before, but their bodies were altered using forbidden techniques. After the modifications, they transformed into various gigantic creatures and joined the battlefield. Each of them possessed powers comparable to gods. People called them the imitation divine weapon. This is a war between two countries, the Southern Kingdom and the Northern Kingdom. The Southern Kingdom, defending their city, is well equipped with abundant firepower, causing the attacking Northern Kingdom to retreat. Faced with this dire situation, the soldiers fall into despair. Suddenly, a group of people in white robes appeared. They arrived directly beneath the walls of the Southern Kingdom. Under the command of Captain Hank, the teammates transformed into their battle forms one by one. What was once an unwinnable battle turns into a crushing victory with their participation. The towering walls became graves for the Southern Kingdom's army. It turned out that they were all modified imitation divine weapons. People also called them the saviors of the nation. However, they failed to notice that the patterns on their skin were increasing, until the first member of the team started to undergo beastification. After the battle, Harry, who transformed into a three-headed snake, completely lost control. He began releasing poisonous gas without distinguishing between friend and foe, killing all the nearby soldiers. Captain Hank realized then that it was a side effect of the body modifications. At that moment, a cannonball struck Harry, knocking him down. When Harry regained consciousness, he understood the mistakes he had made. He chose to end his life. This event makes all the members see their own potential fate in Harry. The imitation divine weapons, once hailed as the hope of the nation, now had their morale plummeting. Captain Hank told them that although the cause of Harry's loss of control was still unknown, they were not alone. If anyone were to lose control of their body again, he would personally resolve the situation. He hoped that every teammate would be able to die while retaining their human consciousness. They continued their assault on the enemy's stronghold. However, in subsequent battles, many teammates began to exhibit signs of beastification. Even Dr. Elaine, who developed this technology, could not find a way to save them. She could only delay their body's beastification periodically. Hank announced that the next day would be the final battle to capture the enemy's capital. However, the faces of the team members lacked the joy they once had. To boost their morale, Hank decided to announce his impending marriage to Dr. Elaine. He urged everyone to return alive and join in their wedding. Now, all the team members had a new hope. But that night, Elaine informed Hank that the war had actually ended. The two nations had signed a peace treaty, but the condition was for the Northern Kingdom to abandon the imitation divine weapons legion. After saying this, Elaine tearfully shot Hank. Hank never understood until his death why everything he and his teammates had done for the country resulted in betrayal by their own nation. Elaine told him that those who became imitation divine weapons would eventually lose their sanity and become monsters. She had tried to develop a cure for them but couldn't find the cause of their body's beastification. Therefore, killing them was the most decisive decision. The saddest thing in the world is killing your own loved ones with your own hands. Afterward, Elaine sought the assistance of Vice Captain Kane to carry out a plan to eliminate all the imitation divine weapons. By shooting them with specially designed bullets, they could die painlessly. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, but Kane suddenly chose to betray them. He personally killed Dr. Elaine, the one who had bestowed them with their superpowers. However, Hank didn't die. He survived due to his powerful regenerative abilities. But when Hank woke up, 6 months had already passed. The war had long ended, and his teammates had returned to their respective hometowns. However, some of them had started to lose their sanity, causing significant damage and casualties to the country. The ones who were once hailed as saviors of the nation had now become despised beings. Hank couldn't accept any of this and never forgot his promise to his teammates. This time, he embarked on a journey to personally help his brothers who had lost their consciousness find ultimate liberation. On the other side, when Bancroft returned to his hometown after participating in the war, he couldn't transform back into his human form. Nancy couldn't believe it. This was her father. A soldier nearby brought out Bancroft's glasses and pocket watch, symbols of his identity. But Nancy still couldn't bring herself to believe it, until Bancroft gently touched her forehead. Nancy truly felt his fatherly love. She gradually began to accept Bancroft's current state, and memories of their past life came flooding back. Back then, she and her father ran an orphanage together. Although their life was not prosperous, they had the company of the children, and their lives were filled with joy. But when the war came, they could only sustain themselves by eating mushrooms. Unexpectedly, Bancroft was selected by the government to become a super soldier. As long as he went to the front lines, The government promised to provide aid funds to the village and orphanage, Bancroft, in order to save the villagers. Ignoring his daughter's dissuasion, chose to enlist in the military. The villagers were all grateful to him. But no one could have imagined that when he returned, he would be transformed into a giant dragon. Although Bancroft was no longer human, he was still the hero of the entire village. The children in the orphanage recognized him as the father who had once adopted them. In the following days, Bancroft would help everyone with farm work, and he would take the children to pick fruits from high places. He would even take them flying thousands of meters in the sky. This kind of father brought unprecedented joy to the children, but tragedy was bound to happen. Recently, Bancroft's emotions at night became very unstable. His roars were like small earthquakes. All the villagers were frightened and ran out of their houses. It wasn't until Nancy called out her father's name that Bancroft regained his sanity. Soon after, as Bancroft's roars became more and more intense, cattle and horses in the village began dying for several consecutive nights. Although the villagers respected Bancroft for the safety of the village, Bancroft had to be shackled with chains, and the children had to be relocated elsewhere. No longer able to be cared for by him and his daughter, Bancroft knew that he had brought trouble to his daughter, so he quietly headed into the depths of the forest alone. On this rainy night, Nancy actually heard that familiar roar again, but when she eagerly rushed over, she witnessed the scene of her father being killed with her own eyes. She tried to stop it, but it was too late. Nancy only remembered the killer's clothes and appearance. The next day, she buried her father, and then packed her belongings, embarking on a journey to avenge her father. But strangely, after traveling through 3 or 4 towns, she still couldn't find any trace of that man. Just then, she unexpectedly found Hank in a tavern. She immediately raised her gun and pulled the trigger, but strangely, although Hank was shot, he remained unharmed. Then he grabbed Nancy and took her into an alley. Nancy revealed her purpose, but Hank paid no attention to her, because his new target for hunting had appeared. This nearly 3-meter blue giant. Lately, he's been known to rob nearby caravans. Hank used to be their captain. Now he had to come and finish them off. Just as he prepares to take action, Nancy steps in front of the blue giant. She didn't want this man to be brutally murdered like her father, but then the blue giant suddenly began to transform. He confesses to his acts of robbing the caravans because he wants to bring prosperity to the villagers. Hank is deeply disappointed in him, yet this is also Hank fulfilling the promise he once made. Anyone who loses his mind must die at the hands of his teammates. Once the gentlest man in the army didn't die as a soldier on the battlefield, but met his demise at the hands of a teammate. Now, Hank no longer wishes to continue fulfilling his pledge. Killing 2 teammates consecutively has caused him immense anguish. He yearns to escape from this place, but Nancy persists and prevents him from leaving. She knows that Hank is the captain of that military corps. In order to understand the reason behind her father's demise, Nancy decides to follow Hank. She wants to unveil the mysterious veil of this war legion. A creature with the body of a snake and the tail of a human appeared unexpectedly by the seaside, yet her singing voice was remarkably enchanting. However, her beautiful voice became a weapon that claimed lives on the battlefield. Any enemy who heard her song would fall into a brief slumber. They will be killed without their knowledge. This is the terror of the songstress, Siren. She is actually a member of the imitation divine weapon. Ever since Siren returned from the battlefield, she has been unable to transform back into a human. People now look at her with fear-filled eyes. Siren finally realizes that in their eyes, she's nothing but a monster. She's afraid of seeing that look in people's eyes again, so she hides alone in a corner. But then she met her former friend Charles. With Charles's help, Siren lived by the sea. She contemplates facing a lonely death like this, until one day she meets Nancy. She told Nancy her story. After hearing Siren's sad story, Nancy decided to stay by Siren's side for a while. From that day forward, Nancy visits Siren every day, bringing joy to her life. Siren grew to love this kind of company, but tragedy eventually strikes. One day, the army pursuing the imitation divine weapon legion discovers Siren's whereabouts. They storm into Charles's home, conducting a thorough search, but Charles puts up a fierce resistance. In the chaos, Charles was shot several times and escaped, but when he got to Siren, he was on his last legs. Charles hoped that Siren wouldn't seek revenge because of him, and implores her to escape quickly. For the first time, Siren is heartbroken. Then she sang a loud and sad song, which instantly reached the ears of the citizens. The next moment, everyone falls into a deep slumber. Siren finally returns to the city, But this time, she has come for revenge. The pursuing army, under the influence of Siren's song, loses control of their bodies. Just then, Nancy stops Siren, shouting her name. It's the sincerest call from a friend, causing Siren to regain her human consciousness. But at that moment, Siren is fatally wounded by the army's attack. With multiple gunshot wounds, Siren takes flight, and she arrives at the stage where she once performed. Now reduced to a charred ruin, she wanted to sing one last song for Nancy, as a final goodbye, but just as she is about to unleash her voice, bullets from the army pierce through her entire body. On the other side, the colossal beast Orlstown is charging towards the world's largest railway bridge. This bridge serves as the lifeline for transporting goods throughout the entire country, supporting the daily lives of people in the north and south. Orlstown aims to destroy this bridge, and the military is desperate to stop it. However, conventional weapons have no effect on Orlstown whatsoever. They can only turn to Hank for assistance. Now that Orlstown's route has been determined, the mission will be considered accomplished if Hank can restrict its movements or alter its path. The operation is scheduled to take place at dusk. The military will use artillery to attract Orlstown's attention while Hank makes his moves simultaneously. As a teammate, Hank knows Orlstown's weakness, although his skin is impervious to weapons, but the inside of his joints is his Achilles heel. Hank thrusts a spear into the target and promptly detonates it, causing intense pain that renders Orlstown immobilized instantly. But Orlstown never hurt anyone. Every time he traveled a route, avoided villages and cities. But now, it is cruelly pinned to the ground, injected with anesthesia by humans. In Orlstown's eyes, Nancy also sees the same clear gaze as her father once had. She understands that Orlstown hasn't completely lost its human consciousness. Orlstown remains near the bridge, causing significant losses for the transport business owners who are forced to shut down. They question why the beast is still alive, which also triggers Hank's dissatisfaction. The individuals who were once regarded as saviors have now become beasts in their eyes. Have they forgotten so quickly who saved this country? The transport business owner is left speechless by Hank's words and decides to handle the beast himself. That night, they attempt to use explosives to kill Orlstown. However, when the smoke clears, Orlstown is not dead. Instead, it goes berserk and loses control after absorbing the energy from the explosion. This sudden turn of events compels Hank to personally deal with his former teammate. He finally transforms into the form of the White Wolf King, preparing to halt Orlstown's advance. However, his powerful wolf claws have no effect on Orlstown. Hank can only attack its weak points. Finally, the military detonates a directional bomb, tearing open Orlstown's belly. Despite being severely injured, Orlstown continues to move forward, driven by an inexplicable belief. At that moment, the military detonates another bomb on the nearby mountain, revealing a view of the sea not far away. Upon seeing the sea, Orlstown seems content. It dawns on Hank that Orlstown's obsession all along was to catch a glimpse of the ocean. It was Orlstown's long-standing wish, and Hank had promised to fulfill it once the war was over. However, in the end, Hank is the one who slays Orlstown with his own hands. Hank buries Orlstown by the seaside, an inevitable outcome for someone in the position of a captain. While he redeems his teammates, he is also redeeming himself. The lifeless body of a woman was cruelly hung on the city wall as a public display. The visible claw marks on her abdomen served as a reminder of the brutality inflicted upon her, and the reason behind this horrific act was simply that she was a street prostitute struggling to survive. The sight left the onlookers trembling in fear. This was the bloody scene that Hank and Nancy encountered upon their arrival. Just then, a young boy emerged and shouted that it was the work of a demon in the church. Hank immediately approached to inquire about the situation. After a few minutes of conversation with the boy, it became apparent that his worst fear had come true. It turned out that the recent string of horrific incidents in the town was the doing of Gaia, a former subordinate of Hank. Gaia possessed the rare attribute of a stone gargoyle, with impenetrable scales and wings that enabled swift flight. In the past, Gaia had been a man of strong righteousness and served as Hank's trusted assistant in the military. However, his unwavering sense of justice had now warped to the point of almost becoming perverse. The boy looked at Hank with hopeful eyes, pleading for him to kill the demon. Lisa, who was present, crouched down and asked the boy why he was so eager to see the gargoyle dead. In response, the boy abruptly tore off her clothes and ran away. Nancy wanted to find the boy again to gather more information, while Lisa, who had regained her composure, received orders from her superiors to return to the military. At that moment, Nancy found the boy and listened to his story. It turned out that his deep hatred for the war hero, the imitation divine weapon, stemmed from the fact that his mother was killed by Gaia, who had been transformed into a stone gargoyle. Although the boy's mother had committed wrongdoing, in the eyes of Gaia, driven by his extreme sense of justice, any transgression, regardless of its magnitude, was a capital offense. To convince Nancy of his words, the boy stole an apple from a nearby stall, and as expected, Gaia immediately appeared and pronounced a death sentence on him. Nancy was certain that he had lost his humanity and tried to reason with him, but Gaia remained unresponsive. Fortunately, Hank arrived just in time. However, in his human form, Hank was no match for Gaia. Facing his former captain, Gaia exchanged a simple greeting, and then instructed Hank to come to the church again at night. After settling Nancy and the boy in a hotel, Hank went alone to face the challenge. Restless, Nancy couldn't fall asleep. As she got up, she discovered that the boy had stolen her hunting rifle. It was clear that he had gone to the church to seek revenge for his mother. In the meantime, Hank slowly entered the church, surrounded by the stench of blood and the sight of countless corpses. His anger surged as he struggled to understand how the once heroic figure had become a murderous demon. Hank immediately launched an attack, and the two evenly matched opponents engaged in a fierce battle. However, relying on his extensive combat experience, Hank gained a slight advantage. Just as Hank had Gaia completely under control, a bullet pierced through Hank's body. It was Elaine's specially crafted ammunition designed to counter imitation divine weapons. Hank collapsed to the ground, weak and powerless. Just then, the boy who had stolen the gun arrived. Though his shot missed Gaia, he bought Hank some time. Caught off guard, Gaia was swiftly defeated by Hank with a single strike. Gaia, burdened by the weight of his distorted sense of justice, finally found solace and could depart from this world. Just then, the long-lost vice captain, Kane, reappeared. Accompanying him was Visa. Now she had transformed into a giant Spider-Woman and had kidnapped Nancy. Kane sent an invitation to Hank, then promptly left. Meanwhile, Nancy, captured by Visa, was tied to a chair. Moments later, Visa slowly walked in, extending her spider legs. She tore Nancy's clothes apart, with the intention of humiliating her. Meanwhile, an auction of divine beasts was taking place. Anyone willing to pay a high price could take them home as pets. A wealthy individual had just offered a substantial sum to buy one, but in the next moment, they were crushed by a colossal beast. And the one who started it all is the vampire Kane, who organized the auction. Because the country had abandoned them in the past, that's why Kane contacted his teammates who have been turned into beasts to take crazy revenge. He aimed to slaughter all the elites of the nation and establish an empire of his own. In an instant, the entire banquet turned into a bloody party, with the monstrous beings feasting on the humans present. At that moment, Hank finally appeared, ready to put a stop to it all. Kane couldn't understand why Hank would do such a thing, as the country had already abandoned them. Just then, the country's military arrived at the scene, a special force specifically assembled to deal with these monstrous beings. Kane stood on a platform and watched. He didn't realize that the last person to stop him was his own brother, Claude. Kane dispatched two powerful monsters to attack Claude. Luckily, Hank showed up just in time to save Claude. The soldiers began focusing their firepower on attacking Kane. His entire chest was pierced through. Hank seized the opportunity and launched an explosive attack. But for Kane, such damage was incapable of killing him. Even with his upper body gone, as long as his blood remained, he could reform his body and resurrect once more. At this point, Kane suspended Nancy in the hall, intending to kill her in front of Hank. Hank, bound by Visa's spider silk, could only watch helplessly as Nancy was shot and killed. In that moment, as Nancy fell to the ground, Hank couldn't help but recall the image of his former lover's death. At that moment, he could no longer control the animal in him. He no longer possessed human emotions. He transformed into a true Silvermoon Wolf King. This was Hank's true hidden power. Hank rushed out of the building like a madman. After he fled the city, he was never seen again. Following these events, Kane established a new nation in the West, planning to create a vampire army that belonged solely to him. A new land of freedom was born. With his terrifying methods of warfare, he directly incorporated the northern lands into his territory. The world was thrown into turmoil. On the other side, Nancy, who was originally dead, was saved by accident. The bullet had not struck any vital organs. Most of the attacks had been absorbed by the material of her dress. She didn't understand why Cain put her in that white dress. In the Northern Army, one soldier's head suddenly started gushing out a large amount of blood. Then Cain slowly emerged, facing a personal visit from the enemy leader. The general calmly greeted Cain. He then ordered the soldiers to open fire. However, despite the bullets clearly hitting Cain, he remained unharmed. At that moment, Cain waved his hand lightly, and the soldiers' heads were severed. He then suddenly appeared behind one of the soldiers and turned him into a puppet. The next moment, the puppet, holding a bomb, lunged at another soldier and detonated the bomb on the spot. Suddenly, Cain flashed in front of the general and swiftly shoved a vial of potion into his mouth. Instantly, the general's head melted away. Now, only Claude remained in the entire camp. Cain didn't immediately kill him, because Claude was the president's son and his own brother. He planned to turn Claude into a puppet and use him as leverage against the president. Just then, Hank arrived on the scene. Cain informed them that all his subordinates had already headed south, where they would eliminate any resistance they encountered on the way, and form an alliance with the Southern Kingdom to annihilate the Northern Kingdom. Cain attempted to persuade Hank to join his camp, but Hank remained steadfast in his oath. In the next moment, Hank transformed into a werewolf and launched a lightning-fast attack on Cain. However, Cain seemed to enjoy it because physical attacks had no effect on him whatsoever. Hank felt bewildered, not knowing where Cain obtained such power. Hank was no match for Cain at this point, and he was soon impaled by Cain, leaving him severely injured. What's worse, in the daytime, Hank's werewolf form will be automatically cancelled. Hank, unable to transform into a werewolf, was completely defenseless against Cain. However, in his final moments, Hank remembered Nancy's words, urging him to survive until the end and uphold his oath. With Nancy's sudden embrace, Hank slowly rose. This unexpected scene infuriated Cain as it closely resembled the moment when Hank and Elaine embraced each other. Overwhelmed by intense jealousy, Cain unleashed his fury and aimed to kill Nancy. In the nick of time, Hank intercepted Cain's attack. Suddenly, Hank's hair started turning white, and a tremendous power instantly enveloped his entire body. Cain was startled by Hank's roar and hastily retreated. Although Cain was still alive, he had clearly suffered severe injuries, and his fortress had been captured by the Northern Army. Despite winning the battle, the situation in the Northern Kingdom remained grim, because all of Cain's subordinates were imitation divine weapons. Finally, after saying goodbye to everyone, Hank, accompanied by Nancy, continued on his journey. He had to keep searching for his former comrades,